So in this video, we're going to look at making some game objects that the player will collide with. And so we'll have some items that the player can collect. We'll call those collectibles. And we'll have some items that will cause the player to lose health points, and we'll call those hazards. So we're going to call all of those things pickup objects. And we're going to learn how to make them into prefabs, which is like a pre-configured, saved game object that we store as an asset. And that's you have to have something turned into a prefab in order to spawn it in a game. So we're going to be spawning these pickup objects. Okay, so we're going to start by configuring the game objects themselves. We're going to add some sprites. We'll come and talk about sorting layers in a little bit. We're going to add a collider. And we're going to add a collider where we're going to be checking that the trigger, it is a trigger. We'll check that to be true. And we're going to also create some tags. Tags are kind of part of this layers and tags. We're going to create two tags. One is collectible, one is hazard. Then we're going to go ahead and create a simple little script, the pickup script. And the pickup script down here, we can tell, is very simple. We have kind of two basic things that we need to have associated with each one of these items. One thing is we want to know what is the type of item that we have. So we're going to create and define an enum. So an enum, once again, is it's our own data type, custom data type, and it means we have these words that essentially are associated with an integer value. And we'll get a drop down that we can select, and by making it public, we'll be able to, well, we're making the class of this enum, it's a data type, we're making that public so we can access it within the pickup class, and down here we're going to have a public variable called type, and it's going to be of that data type, pickup type. So we'll see this drop down when we put this script on one of our pickup objects. The other thing we'll see is that we're going to have points of value that we can associate with that. We're going to learn later about this idea of properties, but for now, which allows this to be read-only, here we're making it by using serialized field. We're making it so we can edit this in the inspector. Here we're adding some code to make this read-only. So it's kind of, it's not quite obvious what we're doing there. But it's a simple script. We basically want to keep track of what's the type of item and how many points are associated with it. Okay, so let's go into Unity then. Okay, so I have I've found some game objects that I could use in my game. I've dragged those into my assets. I could come up here and I could create a 2D sprite, or I can actually just drag this into the scene. And when I drag it into the scene, it remembers the name of this sprite, which was Crystal. So that's perfect. So I'm going to say that this will be one of my collectible items. And then let's see, I have a stone. I'm going to bring that up here. We'll say that's a hazard item. Maybe we'll have this star also. A star will be a collectible item. So we can see we have now crystal, stone, and star. These are 2D sprites. Okay, so let's choose to have the star be something that can fall from above, and then we'll have these other two things that we'll have them spawn. They'll show up, and then the player will have to avoid the rock, and we'll want to collect these crystals, and we'll want to collect the stars. So the first thing that we need to do then is we need to go into the layers, and we need to edit the layers because we want to create those tags. Okay, so we're going to create two custom tags. The first one is collectible, and the second one is hazard. So tags provide a really nice way to find game objects within a scene, or to figure out if what we'll find out is that when the player collides with a game object, we're going to check and find out what tag is associated with that, and then we'll know if we're going to be increasing the score or decreasing the health. So we're going to use tags for that. So then let's come back to this little crystal, and I'm going to add to it, I'm going to add a collider. So physics 2D, I'm going to go ahead and just do a box collider for this one. Yeah, box collider. Okay, so box collider, and it as long as you have your sprite picked first, it will, I'm going to move it in a little bit, it will automatically set the collider to be the same size as the sprite. Okay, so let's go ahead and set the tag on the crystal. I'm going to say that this is a collectible. And then let's take this stone and let's put a collider on the stone. So that's physics 2D. We'll do the same thing, a box collider. We'll edit it and just pull it in a tiny bit. Okay, and we'll add the tag hazard. Okay, and then we have the star. Now the star, we want to have this star be something that can fall. And actually, you know what, let me say this. Let's take the crystal and let's put it at the center of the screen. Okay, and by putting it at the center of the screen, when we make it a prefab, it means that everything will be defined relative to this position here. We'll set the position where we want it spawned, but it'll be relative to it being at 0, 0, 0. Okay, so we have our crystal and we'll do that with these guys before we turn them into the prefab. So for the star, since we want it to fall, right, we're going to have to add two things to it. We're going to have to add a rigid body for movement. So come down and add the rigid body, and we're going to let the rigid body, we'll say sure, freeze rotation around the Z, and let's have collision detection be continuous. And now we want to go ahead and add the collider. Okay, so collider, we'll do a circle collider on the star. Okay, and so collapse that. Circle collider, I'm going to make that smaller. Okay, and now one other thing that we'll need to go back and check with these other guys is we want to have this is trigger be true. So when the player collides with one of these objects, we don't really want to see the objects bouncing off of each other, the player or the star. What we want to have the code tell us that this collision happened, so then we can store points and then we'll delete these game objects. So rather than just having like the interaction that we have between the player and the floor, is that the floor, because it has a collider that's not a trigger, and the player has a collider that's not a trigger, those both have this physical kind of presence in the scene, a physical form. But with these ones, we're going to say that we want to have them act as a trigger. We just want them to notify us that a collision has happened. And we could do it with the other, but for us, we're going to just decide to say that this is trigger. That'll let us know that we've collided with one of these special game objects, because otherwise the player's always going to be interacting with the floor. Okay, so let's go back to this crystal. And the crystal we want to make sure we have is trigger is true, and the same with the stone. The stone collider is trigger is true. Okay, so all of those are true. The star, we need to set it as a collectible. Okay, so one more time. Let's look at the crystal. We've got the tag on it, and we've got it set as a trigger. The stone, right, we have the tag set on it as a hazard, and we have it set as a trigger. The star, we have a tag on it, and we have this collider as trigger. Now, what's going to happen is when we spawn these game objects, for now, let's just go ahead and we'll move them down to exactly where we want to spawn them. So let's take the crystal and let's move it down to where we want the player to collide with it. And so let's see, where is the floor? Where is the floor? There we go. The floor, oh, see, the floor has this Z value of -10, which we don't really see the floor, but I'm not even able to see that game object. So I'm going to set that to 0. That way I want that floor to be visible. And I want to make sure that these game objects are above the floor. So let's see, that's the floor. Okay, that's above the floor. Okay, the stone. Move it down here. And then the star, what we're going to see about the star is that we're going to start the star up here. It's going to fall, but it's going to go right through the floor. So we're going to have to come back and fix that. Okay, so for now, let's go ahead and just hit play. We don't have any logic in the code to have points stored with these things, and we don't have any logic to have the player do anything when these collisions happen. But so let's go ahead and just see what we have. So we have the star went down right through the floor, and now let's have the player walk and see what happens. Okay, so the player walks right through those game objects that have the trigger. And we can see they're kind of on the same sprite level, so we want to change that because that looks a little odd, right? But it lets us know that these are not acting like the collider that was the floor, right? And so that's consistent with what we want. So let's do this. This star, right, it has the rigid body with gravity, so it fell. But what we want to do is we want it to stop when it hits the floor. And the reason it didn't stop is because the collider on it is this trigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to put another collider on the star. And so where is that? Physics 2D. We'll make it another circle collider. And this one is not going to be a trigger. So this is the second one. It's not going to be a trigger, but we need it to be smaller than the first one. I'm going to make it tiny, and it's going to be inside. So this one is the one that's going to keep the star from going through the floor. The outer one is going to be the one that the player hits first, and it'll notify us in the code that that collision happened, and then this inner collider is going to keep the star from going through the floor. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like now. Okay, so then we saw the star fall, and then it's just sitting right there. So that's perfect. We can also come in and maybe we'll learn how to animate the star. We could have it rotating. Okay, so that's perfect. Let's come back here and see what else we need to do then. Okay, so we haven't added sorting layers, so let's go ahead and look at sorting layers really quick. Let's see, where are we? So sorting layers. Sorting layers allow us to control the rendering order for sprites. Okay, here's a Unity video on sorting layers. Sorting layers, when we open this tags and layers, we'll have this thing sorting layers, and we're going to create quite a few different sorting layers. And the order that we have these sorting layers, these will be applied to sprites. We can also put a sorting layer on the canvas. So we'll want the canvas to be in front of all other game objects. Then we're going to decide to have the spawned objects in front of the player. And then by default, there's always this default sorting layer. We're going to make a background layer, and we'll have it be behind the default. We can have a scenery layer. So we're going to make those layers, and then when we're in Unity, we can look at the, let's look at the star. And when we look at the sprite for the star, let's collapse that. Collapse that. Right here, this sorting layer, right? If we had those other values, we could associate those other values here. And we also have another way to, within one layer, we can add a number that'll also control the sorting layer, with 0 being the farthest back from the camera. The higher the number, then the later that it gets rendered, so it's more in the front. Okay, so let's go to layers, let's go to edit layers, and let's go sorting layers, and we want to add, start with a background. Let's go ahead and have one for scenery. Let's go and have one for the player. I'm making quite a few of these. We'll say these are the spawned objects. And we'll do one more for UI. This is more than we need, but it's okay. And then I can grab this layer over here and put it behind. So the thing that'll be rendered in front of all other things will be anything that has the sorting layer of UI. So then we can come back. We're going to say that these game objects, the star, is going to be part of that spawned object. So let's click on the star, and now we can choose to set its sorting layer to be spawned. And let's do the same thing with these. So the stone, I'm going to put that on the spawned, and the crystal, I'll do the same thing. We're going to put it on the spawned sorting layer. And we should be able to, let's check the player. Let's put the player on the player sorting layer. So now if I move the player for sure it should be behind, right? I can see the players behind all these game objects, whereas before they were all on that same default layer. Okay, so that's sorting layers. Let's do one more thing. So we want a background, and the background, there's several different ways to do it. I'm choosing to take this canvas and put the sorting layer for the canvas as UI. Now, when we start having some child objects of the canvas, right, they don't have this option for sorting layer. So order in the hierarchy will determine the sorting order for these child objects. And that's also true if we had no sorting layers at all, then the lowest item in the hierarchy would be the thing that's rendered last. It's rendered closest, it's rendered in front between, it's rendered closest to the camera. So the things that determine the rendering order are first this order in the hierarchy, with the lower items being rendered toward the front, but we're overriding that when we put these sorting layers on there. And so within a sorting layer now, we also have this granularity of adding order in layer, where an item with a value of 0 is essentially like higher in the hierarchy. Let me go ahead and save this. I'll save. So for a background image, what we could do is I'm going to put another canvas in here, because a background image is nice to be able to have it anchored so it doesn't change sizes. So I'm going to go ahead and create another game object that is a canvas, a UI canvas, and I don't want it to be at the bottom. I'll call this the background canvas. Let's say BKG. Background canvas. I'm going to move it up to the top. And then I'm going to give it, I need to change this render mode to screen space camera, select the camera in the scene just like we did with the other one, and now I get this sorting layer option, and I'm going to have it at the background. And now for this canvas, I can go ahead and add a child object that is a UI image. So there's two different types of ways to add images. One is by adding sprites. Those are regular game objects. They're not canvas game objects. If I want something to be a child of a canvas, then I need to add it as an image. So I'm going to add an image. And let's see, did I put that background in here? Yeah, I did. Okay, so I could have actually, you know what, I'm going to delete that. Instead I'm going to add a panel. So a panel is this UI element we're also going to be learning to work with. So a panel is the same as an image, except by default it's already stretched to the size of the canvas. And I'm going to set the image to be this actual background image. There we go, background image. And the other thing about a panel is when we look at the color, I can tell right here that this black part means that it's not fully opaque. So here now I'm moving this alpha over, and I can see that now I have a background. And okay, and I could also say that I want to preserve the aspect ratio. So when I preserve the aspect ratio, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say that by default this was stretched all the way, but now I want to keep the aspect ratio, but I'm going to make this image actually bigger than the canvas that it is constrained to. Okay. All right. So that way I know that this image is not going to get distorted. In fact, I'm going to move it down here, and we can, when we come in here later, we can have multiples of these, and we can have the camera moving along, kind of following the player along. Okay, so that looks good. So now we have this panel, the canvas for the background, right? I put in that background sorting layer, so it's behind everything else. Okay, let me go ahead and do a save. Okay, let's do a real quick look then at that pickup script. So in order to make that script, down here in my scripts, I'm going to right click and say create a C# script, and it's going to be pickup. That's the name of the script. And we'll go into Visual Studio and we'll edit this. It's a very simple script. Okay, so class pickup. Above that I want those enums, so we'll make those public. Enum. And we'll call this the pickup type. I'm a little inconsistent in terms of whether that U should be capitalized, so I left it lowercase there. So remember enums, right? It's this list of words that have an integer associated with them. They'll show up as a drop-down list in the inspector. So what am I going to have? I'm going to have items that are like crystal. What else? A rock, a star, and then anything else. You know, you guys will come back and add your own types of items. Maybe I'm going to have a potion. Maybe I'll have a gem later. So we're adding all of the different types of pickups. Where I had said that the rock is going to be a hazard, the rest of these will increase our score. Okay, so for this pickup class, we're not actually going to have any big events going on. We're just using it to have that data stored. So we want to have this variable for value. Okay, so an integer value associated with each one. We'll always keep this positive. So keep as a positive value. So even when we have something that's going to subtract from health, we're always going to make sure that we remember to keep the value that we post as positive. Okay, and then we're just going to go ahead and make one more variable. We'll make this one public. Well, let's do serialized field. So serialized field, whoops, is the same thing. It keeps something private, but it lets it be visible in the inspector. Okay, so this is going to be, the data type of this is going to be, it'll be private. If I didn't spell out private, it would be private by default. And then it's pickup type. So that's the data type, pickup type. And I'm going to call it type, T-Y-P-E. Okay, so this will get set. Okay, and I'll come in later and add that property that is this read-only property. Well, let's just do it. We'll learn about properties a little bit later, but we'll just go ahead and do this now so we don't have to remember to come back and modify this script. So we'll say this is going to make it read-only. It's a weird little syntax, but what it's saying, it's connecting this private value with this public thing called a property. It's also a way to protect, kind of to enforce encapsulation. And when you're reading a value, what it means is we want to find out what's in here. So we're going to return the value of this value up here. Okay, so we'll keep it like that. Okay, we'll come back and learn more about properties, but we're not going to talk any more about it right now. This way, this will be the way this script is until project 3. So let's go ahead and do a build. Once again, I don't care about warnings. Come back out now to Unity, and let's pick each one of these game objects and add that script. So the pickup script, I'm going to add. It'll let me, there we go. Okay, so I can drag it over, and what we see is that I get to add points. So this is the crystal. I'm going to say the crystal is worth 5 points, and this is our enum. I'm going to set that to be a crystal. So, and the idea is once we get this game object configured, so it is configured, we have the script on it, we have the collider on it, we have the sprite set as we want. Now to make that into a prefab, it means I want it to be an asset. I'm going to create a new folder in my assets. And we'll call this prefabs. Okay, so I'm going to click into there. And now to take that crystal game object that's configured how I want, I have the script on it with the points associated with it, the collider, everything that I want is on there. I'm going to drag that game object out of the hierarchy and down into this folder. And now I can tell that it's a prefab. The crystal is called a prefab asset. And we can see that it even changed the way it looks in the hierarchy. And when I open the prefab, so now prior to that, let's say the stone and the star are only associated with, in terms of game objects, they're only associated with this scene. But by taking this game object, the crystal, and making it a prefab, it now means that I can use this in multiple scenes. In fact, let's go ahead and take the player game object and also make a prefab out of it, because we know we're going to want to maybe have that player in multiple scenes. And so let's see, let's come back to the crystal, and here I have one instance of the crystal game object. In fact, if we look here, I could say that for this instance, I want to have the points be 10. So this is an instance of a prefab, and I can modify anything that's an instance of a prefab without it impacting the asset that's the prefab. So now I've opened up, by double clicking down here in the assets, I can see here that this is the value. 5 is the value. If I change this to 7, let's go ahead and say we're going to change it to 7. And then I can come here to go back to the scene. So I've changed the points associated with this one. Let's go back to the scene and see what happened here. Okay, so this one still has its value of 10. If I come here, let's see, and open the prefab. Let's see, I should be able to to apply to all. Interesting. Okay. If I want to figure out what is the prefab associated with it, I'm going to say I want to select. So for this game object, I can see now that this is the prefab that's associated with it. Otherwise, I can just come back here. And this one I have is overriding. I could say that I want to revert it back to the actual one, and then I can see that now it changed its value back to the original prefab. Okay, so then the final two things I need to do then is put the pickup script on these two game objects and create prefabs out of them. We need something to be a prefab if we're going to spawn it in a scene. Okay, so for the stone, let me come back and get my script, the pickup script. Did it go on there? It did not. I can always come over here and come down to my scripts and add the pickup script. Okay, so, and we always want to make sure we only add one instance of a script, of any particular script, onto one game object. So if I had 2 instances of this, that would be a problem. Okay, so let's say that this is going to have a value of, it's the rock, it's a hazard. Let's say it's 10. And like I said, we'll keep this positive, and then we'll write code so that when we hit this, it's going to subtract this value from our health. Okay, so let's take the stone and drag it down into the prefabs. And then let's go ahead and go to the star and add that script to it, the scripts, the pickup script, and we'll make the star worth 5, and there we go. Okay, so we've got that ready to be configured, and now I could let's see, now I could go ahead and delete the star here. I could delete it in the scene, and if I wanted to add another one, I would just bring this star up, and now I have the star. We can tell that I didn't center it, so I would be better off coming down and opening that prefab and getting it centered, putting it at 0, 0. Okay, and saving, do a save, and then let's do the same thing with the crystal. Let's put the crystal, the actual crystal object, at 0, 0, and save. And let's do that with the stone as well. I'm going to put it at 0, 0. And save. That way when we spawn it, we're not going to have it at some weird, did I do that with the stone? Yeah, stone. Okay. Okay, let's go back. Okay, and now these ones still have their own position, but the prefab itself has all of its position values being at that 0. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. We'll come back next, and in the next video we're going to add code to the player controller so that when we collide with it, we're going to have, we'll start by just having a debug message telling us that something like that happened. Okay, so we'll stop right here.